An appeals court has ruled that former Minister of Mineral Resources, Gwede Mantashe, and the National Nuclear Regulator were wrong in their decision to fire anti-nuclear activist Peter Becker, who was on the board of the country's safety regulator. Becker was fired for an alleged conflict of interest between his personal beliefs and his role at the nuclear safety regulator. To discuss this, I'm now joined by energy analyst Hugo Kruger. Hugo, great to speak to you. Can you provide an overview of the court's ruling against the Minister Mantashe's decision to fire Peter Becker? And I suppose some insights into this alleged or apparent conflict of interest.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, rather. The court, this is the appeal. Minister Mantashe last year already lost the court case where he accused Peter Becker of conflict of interest. Now, Becker is a known character to the nuclear world. For what it's worth, my background's in nuclear as well. He's an anti-nuclear activist. And the minister basically said that an anti-nuclear activist cannot be on the board. And what he used was Becker gave an interview to a magazine, I forgot the name now, just after he became the board member, where he spoke out against certain aspects of the plant. And then the minister said he was violating his conflict of interest. Becker pushed back, and it fell on legal technicalities. And eventually the court ruled that, listen, the minister can't just fire somebody for his views. He was appointed by the minister to the board of the regulator, one of 12 members, by the way. And one argument that the court used was, even if Becker is anti-nuclear, he's one of 12. It doesn't mean that the board is going to be anti-nuclear, and they welcomed that perspective from the community that he represented. So they ruled that Mantashe can't, he has to actually have a conflict of interest and have violated something. Can't just because of his views be fired, which makes somewhat sense. I personally, question why Minister Mantashe appointed him in the first place. He was appointed on the nomination of what is called civil societies, but all of them were anti-nuclear societies to begin with. Okay, so I think the minister made a bad judgment to appoint him in the first hand without noticing what was going on. But then, the court's ruling is what it is. You can't just fire somebody for his views.
How much does it speak to the appointment by ministers or other high-ranking government officials on the absence or possible absence of due diligence, or certainly the due diligence processes in making some of these appointments?
Yeah, well, look, if the civil society groups nominate people, and from a minister perspective, I think at that point, to be honest, Minister Mantashe wasn't really aware of everything that happened in the energy sector, and he didn't realize that there is a lot of anti-technology lobbying from various groups going on. And so I question that judgment, and this is whoever's the next Minister of Energy, I would say this to him. My advice for him would be there's 7 major sources of energy, and they're all dishonest in some way, and they're all honest in some way. And you must be very careful when you look at anti-nuclear or anti-renewable arguments. Ask the question, follow the money first. And I do think that was a bad judgment on Minister Mantashe's behalf. He tried to rectify it with the firing, but he didn't follow the right procedure. Simple as that.
Now, how significant is this ruling for the governance of nuclear safety in the country?
No, I don't think appointing Becker was significant at all to begin with. Becker represents Hugo Kruger Alliance. I said everyone in the nuclear industry knows about him. He has an organization, as far as I can tell, that's a one-man show. So he actually represents his organization, representing himself, and he's not the expert in nuclear. And the nuclear regulator, they can only take input from the board, but if you have a quack sitting on a board, the regulators, the ones I have known, the previous ones, are highly competent people in nuclear safety. They're usually radiophysicists or they're nuclear engineers. And they would just say, look, this is just an opinion that we acknowledge the opinion, we can't accept it.
So what does this mean for Peter Becker and his role on the NNR board?
Well, I think the board, if I'm not mistaken, there has to be an appointment for a new board soon. So I think it's sort of just going to die, but maybe they'll try and nominate him again, and I just hope the next minister is aware of this.
And how can civil society play a more constructive role than in nuclear safety in the country?
You see, the issue of nuclear safety has always been that with all of these public participation hearings, there is it becomes a special interest hearing if the public doesn't participate. So, for example, the ones on the life extension of Kuberg, I went through the slides, and there was, out of all the people who represented, there was only one person defending it. The rest were all anti-nuclear activists. Now, the Social Research Foundation did polling in South Africa on nuclear technology some years ago, And they found 60 to 70% of the countries okay with building a new nuclear plant, at least in principle. I mean, we can debate the finances and all that stuff maybe. South Africa doesn't really have an anti-nuclear political body, but we have some anti-nuclear activists that are hijacking the process and then want to say that I'm the activist and I speak on behalf of the whole country. And what I would encourage the public to do is that when there are these public hearings, is to speak out and say, look, nuclear technology, it's a technology like anything else. There's nothing to be scared of, something that we've controlled for 40 years. And we know it's actually one of the safest technologies of all energy. But when it comes to energy, nuclear has this taboo towards it. So you're always going to have anti-nuclear activists. I wouldn't ban them or anything like that. But I do just think they need to be confronted with head-on facts and data. And I do believe the public is actually more informed than the activists.
Okay, so I think we've pretty much touched on what we can on Peter Becker, but let's talk about the energy situation in South Africa at the moment. We've enjoyed last few months where there's been no load shedding, or at least very little of it. If some have experienced it, are we on the right track? If that is a question to ask.
Yes, one of the corrective actions that was taken, especially since Andre de Ruyter left, was that Eskom started a serious program of overhauling and maintaining the coal fleet. And my view has always been, whenever one thinks of coal, it was and it still is the fastest way to get out of load shedding, to recover our safety margin. And that was the missing key. And many engineers and analysts pointed it out to say, yes, in principle, we're okay with energy transition, wind, solar, nuclear, whatever you want to build. But you cannot just walk away from your existing system. You need to maintain it. And as you maintain it, you can nudge it in a decarbonized direction. Okay, that should have been the plan. So that idea seems to work. Then also what has happened is that the energy trading, I saw Chris Yellen tweeting about this yesterday, I think it was, is going to start in South Africa. So we're going to bring some competition. And a prerequisite for that has always been we should be out of load shedding. So that's a good thing. And now if private investors and private things come, if there is corrections to the business model, it won't hurt people with load shedding. That was always the fear that many of us had. So in that case, we're on the right track. But I would say this, the system is still fragile. Yes, we have figured out maybe electricity generation, but we're seeing now in Johannesburg and in Pretoria local levels of load shedding. That is called load reductions, right? And that's because the distribution system wasn't properly serviced. So another program, if I were to advise the next government, would be to look at infrastructure in general. South Africa needs to maintain the infrastructure. A lot of the infrastructure was built during the apartheid years. It's at the end of its functional lifetime. It needs to be upgraded, and that's also a catalyst for economic growth. So I would really target the deficiencies in the system, and then just note that electricity, just because we're out of load shedding, doesn't mean we have a stable system. There's still a lot of deficiencies and errors in the system that has to be fixed.
Now, are we making any progress in as far as transitioning to renewable energy is concerned? In a number of conversations that I've had about how South Africa or how Eskom has been able to sustain these vast periods without load shedding, and part of it has been attributed to cleaner energy.
It's true that some of it has been, especially the issue of load shedding has always been, since solar panels scaled South Africa, the evening peak, and batteries has certainly helped reduce demand a little bit. If I looked at statistics yesterday on solar panel diffusion worldwide, South Africa is in the top 15 economies. We are ahead of France and just behind Poland in terms of solar diffusion, in adding solar panels to the rooftop in particular. So we've hit was 10, maybe 15% of our electricity is already coming from renewables, and that trend will continue. And the more load shedding there is, you see, with load shedding and the private markets now, Eskom is in a very difficult situation, which is good from our perspective, bad from theirs. If they don't perform, people can now go onto rooftop or renewables. So it becomes a counterbalancing force to underperforming Eskom, which is where we want the system to be. We don't want to select the winners and losers. We just want the system to punish those that are badly performing. So we're heading in that direction. I would say South Africa has to look at our offshore wind potential, in particular in Richards Bay, and there's a lot of potential that's untapped over there. And then there's a big debate as to who's going to fund the transmission lines. Do we really need 14,000 kilometers, or can you just put the rooftop solar on houses and use feeding tariffs? And then the other question which is coming in is nuclear. I was interviewed on Ghanaian TV not that long ago, and Ghana is going for nuclear as part of their mix. So they've decided we want 20 to 30% of our electricity generated from nuclear, and the rest will be solar and wind. So we need to decide also what percentage do we want nuclear. And by that, I would say I don't want Peter Becker making that policy. I would want someone else.
Energy analyst Hugo Kruger, appreciate your time.